So in our study here with Abraham, his wife Sarah's passed away. Now Abraham is there in a time of grief, a time of mourning. He's talking to some folks about a burial place. He's talking to the sons of Heth. He says, I'm a stranger and a sojourner. So he's trying to find a place to bury his wife. He's trying to find a burial ground. And so he goes to these people here to find a place to bury his children. And so the people of the community around him, notice in verse, the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, after he said, I need a place to bury my wife. Hear us, my Lord. These people answer back, Thou art a mighty prince among us. It's one of the things I say about Abraham. He was a man that those around him revered him. He had the type of character that pleased God and pleased man around him. He wasn't a compromiser, but he had good character. He was a man of character. He was a man of kindness. He was a man of seeking others above himself. He didn't use his riches, and he was a wealthy man. He didn't use his riches to lord it over people. He was, you see to Abraham, he was kind to his servants, and he respected them. And in fact, one servant, he felt that it was close enough to be his son. And he said, Lord, maybe this son could be my heir. No, God said, that's not the one. So he was a man that had because he was wealthy, it didn't mean that he did not have compassion and consideration for those around him. And these people around him understood that. And so that's a real testimony of a person's character. Just because you're a person of God and just because you have good, strong convictions, it doesn't mean that everybody around you has to hate you. You can come across with truth in the right way so that people will revere you to the point they listen to you. When sometimes I think in Christianity, there's been some who thinks you got to have everyone mad at you all the time or you're not doing your job. And it's true, some people will be mad, but for being confronted with the truth, but that shouldn't be the general rule. And I think Abraham was a great illustration, a great example. Abraham was a gentleman. Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, even the children of Heth. This is respectfulness to these people. And he begins to talk to these people about a place of burial. And there's a man by the name of Ephron. Evidently he was the head of this group, and he was wanting to get a cave, a field there for a burial ground. And Ephron dwelt among the children of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the audience of the children of Heth, even all that went into the gate of the city. And I'm not going to read all of these verses of the Bible down through here, but basically what it is Abraham said, let me purchase a cave, a burying field for my place and my wife, and in this passage, Ephron would say, no, let me just give it to you. And Abraham would be very respectful. Oh no, I very appreciate you, and I thank you for your kindness, but I want to purchase. Oh no, let me give it to you. And although Abraham knew that this guy was probably trying to just be real nice to him, and really, in reality, he wanted to get paid. And so it was sort of a thing back and forth, who was going to be kindest through this whole thing. But isn't that neat that these people were very kind to one another? And so it goes back and forth, and he agreed to have a piece of property that he could have, and so when it gets down to it, Abraham says, let me give you 400 shekels of silver for this piece of property. Now, 400 shekels of silver was quite a amount of money. I did some studying. A shekel weighed about a half an ounce. So he's talking about 200 ounces of silver. Now, I sort of looked up the market price for silver today, which is almost $35 an ounce. So he's talking about between $6,000 and $7,000, in today's money for a place to bury his wife. So, it's a pretty good piece of money. So he wasn't willing to just give it away. Yes?
But Ephron told him it's worth that many shekels.
Yeah, he was telling him that, but he didn't want it. He was trying to say, no, it wasn't worth. I don't want it, but that's how much it's worth. But Abraham said, no, I'll give you 400 shekels for it. So he didn't try to get him down or anything on it. So he gave him, in what would be a pretty good lump sum of money if you think about a burial plot in today's world. And he didn't want to offend Ephron. He didn't want to, cause a problem there. He was appreciative of this place. And so we see this person coming together. We see Abraham being a real gentleman in this, and he's going to lay his wife to rest there. That would be sort of a grave plot for a family there for him, or they could eventually Abraham would be buried. And so we see the death of Abraham in this passage, or Sarah rather. Now let's go on to chapter 24 of Genesis. And this is the chapter here that deals with Abraham searching out a wife for his son Isaac. Abraham did not want his son Isaac to have a child or a wife from the country of Canaan. And Abraham knew that this is their dwelling place, but he wanted somebody from his family's background, his family's people, which was sort of a common practice in the ancient Middle East. And so we pick this up in chapter 24. And Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto the eldest servant of his house that ruleth over all that he had. And didn't name him as probably Eliezer, because he was the main servant. He was the one that had probably the most influence, and Abraham counted on him more than any other. He says, "Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh." It was, I want you to do something, and for some reason in these ancient times, to swear that you would do it, you would put your hand underneath a person's thigh. That would be a very unusual thing for us to do in our society today, but and they had a lot of different practices back then, didn't they? It had involved contracts with shoes and putting your hand under the thighs and different stuff. But that's the way they did things. And so, verse 3, "I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto the son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell." But he says, "But thou shalt go into my country and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac." So he's going to send his servant Eliezer out to his country to find a wife for Isaac. And again, there's a lot. You probably ought to read this yourself. There's a lot of verses in this chapter, 67 verses. So we're not going to try to go through 67 verses of this, but he was concerned, well, what if I can't find them and all this? But he said, if you can't find them and you did your best and do this, it'd be fine. But because, he swore that he would. That's a very important thing there in the Old Testament times. But he says, I'll release you from this oath as long as you make this attempt. I think about Eliezer, though, as he goes off to find a wife, I see that he's a person who also has a love for God and a relationship with God. And evidently, he's learned that from his master Abraham. And so he heads off to find this woman, and he gets to this point, and he prays. Now notice there in verse 12, "And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, I pray thee, send me good speed this day, and show kindness unto thy master Abraham." And so he goes on and he prays, and he actually prays specifically about this woman who would come out to be this one that would be the wife. And so as you think about that, first of all, he had a relationship with God. He was willing to pray. When you have a big decision to make, do we pray? Eliezer was on an important mission. His master Abraham had sent him out to find a bride. That would be a big mission. How do you like to pick the bride for somebody? Just think about how much he thought of his servant to be able to do such a job, to pick the right woman for his son, this one who was the promised seed from God. What an important thing. And so he sent him out, but Eliezer went out with prayer. He went out talking to God, saying, God, you lead me to this person. God, you lead me to the one. And he very specifically prayed for this one. This one who would come to the well, one who would offer them the drink of the water. And as you go down through this story, he gets to this place where they came in, and where the well was with the city, and they would get their water, and so he brings his camels and everything up. So in verse 15, we're introduced to Rebekah, which would become Isaac's wife. And it came to pass before he had done speaking. So while he's praying, is what this thing. Talking about God answering prayers in a hurry. He's praying this prayer that God would send the right person out. here comes Rebecca. And Rebecca came out. The very one. It wasn't like, you had to sit and try to think, is it girl number 1, girl number 2, girl number 3? Which one is it I'm going to pick? It wasn't like what some of those shows they got on TV, these bachelor shows, they're going to pick this woman. It wasn't like that. He just prayed for the real woman to come out, the one that's going to be, and here comes Rebecca, right out. And he was actually related to Abraham, his family. And so this was part of the ancient way to find wives, and she offered to drink to the camels and take care of them, just like he did. So he realized immediately God had answered the prayer, and so when this happens, all of a sudden Eleazar knows God has been there, God has answered. God has, right away, girl number 1, Rebecca. And so after all this come, he was just so moved that this was right there, God had given this answer, and the man bowed down his head and worshiped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord God of my master Abraham, who hath not left destitute my master of his mercy and his truth, I being in the way the Lord led me to the house of my master's brethren." He just saw this was God all over this thing. He was really excited that God heard that prayer. God immediately, it's interesting. Rebecca was on the way before Eleazar even prayed. So God knows our need even before we ask, but He knows we're going to ask. So He brought the two together immediately. It wasn't no accident that they came to here comes Eleazar, all this hundreds of miles, he's journeyed, days of journeying, and ends up at this well at the certain time of the day, which was the time of the day that Rebecca normally came out to take care of her chores. And so God brought these two things together, and he was just moved with, wow. One of these God things. And sometimes you just moved by these God things. Don't you just love hearing, I don't know, this is a story I heard the other day. I was listening to the Caleb radio station. And this, how sometimes they have people call in and just sort of say, this is a God thing, And this woman the other day, she said her grandfather was dying. And she did get a chance to go see him, but she wanted to send a letter to him, but she kept putting it off. And so finally, one day she had some pictures of her grandchildren, and she wanted to just talk to her grandfather one more time about eternity. And she put this letter in the mail on this, I think it was like a Tuesday afternoon in Philadelphia. Her grandfather was way out in Arizona. But anyway, the next morning, her mother calls and said, "Your grandfather passed away this morning." That had been Wednesday morning. And she said, "Oh," he said, I sent a letter, but I guess, he wouldn't have got it and everything." And she was very upset that she'd put it off and everything. And then her mother, a day or two later, she said, "You know about that letter? Did you say you sent a letter out on Tuesday? Well, Tuesday evening, Granddad got your letter." And she said, "No, wait, you sure it's the same letter? What was in it?" She said, "Yeah, it was in it. They had the pictures in it and had these things." And she said, "Well, Granddad, he read the letter. We shared that with him before he died." Now listen to this. She put the mail in her mailbox in her house, not even at the post office, on Tuesday around lunchtime. Somehow on Tuesday evening in Phoenix, her grandfather is in the hospital, opens the letter up. Now you tell me how humanly possible that is. That woman said, talking about the God thing, there's no explanation of that. The chance, even if the mail guy directly went to the airport, handed it to a guy on a jet, and flew across the country, get out and get it over to the hospital room, by that time, it'd be like, what's the chances of that? And so sometimes there's just things that happen, you just have to say, well, God was in that. I don't understand it. And she said, we don't to this day know how that letter got into the presence of my grandfather, other than God just did it. I don't know whether he strapped it to an angel's back and they shot across the country or what, but something happened. But she said that was an amazing thing. And so this is one of those, it's pretty amazing that he's praying a specific prayer and popped up Rebecca and becomes this woman who's very important in all of Bible history. She's going to be the future mother of Jacob and Esau, and Jacob's going to be the father of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, which formed the nation of Israel. We're talking about an important woman. This woman is very, very important. And so, anyway, we're introduced. She takes him back to, Rebecca had a brother. Brother was evidently the head of the family, Laban. Now, I introduced Laban because Laban's also an important character, especially in one of, down the road when their son Jacob goes to this land, and he stays with old Uncle Laban. And Uncle Laban and Jacob was sort of two of a kind, and both of them sort of tricksters and everything else. So we're introduced to Laban here, and basically he tells Laban what Abraham had told him, and will you be able to release your sister for to be the wife of my servant's son Isaac? And they made the deal, and she went back with Eleazar, and here just toward the end of the chapter, we'll get down here in verse, after all this was taking place, again in verse 52, and it came to pass that when Abraham's servants heard their words, the fact that they were going to release her to be the wife, Abraham's servants heard these words, he worshiped the Lord, bowing himself to the earth. Really, he always, notice his heart of worshiping God. He worshiped God at the beginning when God was answering the prayer. At the end, when it was confirmed, he worshiped the Lord. He realized it wasn't him. This wasn't happening because he was a slick salesman trying to find a wife for his servant's or his master's son. It wasn't anything he did. He realized that he was giving God all the credit. So they begin their trip back, and I think about, then we get back to the end of the story. Verse 60 here, they blessed Rebekah as he's getting ready to leave, and said unto her, thou art our sister. Now listen, what you be thou the mother of thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gates of those which hate them. I don't know if they understood everything was going to go on, but she would literally be the mother of a multitude of people. Because out of Isaac and Rebekah come Jacob, the nation of Israel. And here it is, 4,000 years later, and all the Jews of this earth still scattered this earth. Who they come from? Rebekah. Isn't that something? Them people didn't realize what they were saying. They didn't know the scope of all this, what God was doing. But they sure said what was right. We're back home. Back on the home front, old Isaac is wondering, man, could you imagine the waiting period for old Isaac? Oh, Dad sent Eliezer out to get my wife. Who's she going to be? Some old woman with one tooth left. Oh, what's going to happen? Can you imagine what he's going through his mind? And Isaac came all the way to the well of Lehurai, and for he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field the evening time. He just goes out, oh, let me just think about this thing. What's going to happen? He lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted off the camel, and she got down off the camel, for she said unto the servant, what man is that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant said, it is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all things that had done. He said, this is what God has done. And Isaac brought her unto his mother, Sarah's tent, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. He loved her, and Isaac was comforted after the mother's death. And so, a good story. It was sort of how God brought this two couple together. This was a couple that God was going to use and for great things in his plan. I do want to just finish up with the last part of Abraham's life. And Abraham, he's well up there in age, but Abraham gets married again. He's one of these guys, well, I don't want to be single. I'm only like 120 or something. I need to get married. No use to waste a lot of good days left. And again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And basically, he has 6 more sons. So Abraham was slow getting going in life, but he sort of had a pretty good family. And there's a lot of these sons listed here. The most probably important one that shows up the most in Scripture is the son of Midian. The Midian and all these people all had important roles in different little countries and different things that started out of Abraham. Of course, the Midian has started a group called the Midianites that we know of in the Bible. The Midianites, unfortunately, they were kin to the people of Israel, and they were a real thorn in the flesh. They were really a problem in the days of the judges, especially. You know, the Midianites was always robbing the Israelites and things. So that's, you know, that was part of the family of Abraham that was causing a lot of problem with his group of people. But I just want to end up here after all of his days. And these are the days and the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 115 years, about 175 years old. And then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. You know, Abraham's life was a life of great amazement. It was a life that, you know, just started out just trusting God, and he didn't know what was going to happen. And here, 4,000 years later, still one of the most important people in history. Not only has he influenced us who are Christians, you know, the Jews, the Jewish nation, how many Muslims are in this world? More than 1 billion, aren't there? Something like that, 1 billion, 2 billion maybe, I don't know. But most, who do they send their roots back to? The Abraham and his ancestors. So probably Abraham is probably been responsible for the biggest percentage of people that has lived for this many centuries and millennials that we see in our culture. Very important character of the Bible, and he was a man who had to learn how to grow in his faith, learn how to walk by faith, and he was a man that God spent much time talking about. That he was one of God's choicest people, and but as all people, they come to an end. I used to have one of my Bible teachers used to say, you know, he says, just get really interested in a Bible character, and then you always see those words, and he died. So, you know what it is? You know, we may think that God can't make it without us, but God will make it without us, and God will raise up another person. God will go on. His plan will go on. So we're going to close out on Abraham here, and we're going to look into more the next time with Isaac's life, and we'll see some important things about him as his great connecting role between Abraham and Jacob and the nation of Israel.